Amnesty International says new refugee centres on Manus Island offer less protection than the previous camp and don't meet asylum seekers' basic needs. Researchers from the human rights watchdog were on the island before, during and after hundreds of male refugees were moved to the new accommodation towards the end of last year. With more, here's Kate Schuetze, the organisation's Asia-Pacific researcher. So, Kate, what did your fellow workers find when you went to these new centres?
Well, what we found is there was a lot of stress and anxiety in that period leading up to the 31st of October when the Australian authorities, by and large, pulled out of the facilities, leaving them in limbo. We visited them on the 31st. They were very fearful for their safety, and those fears actually did pan out on the 23rd and the 24th of November when they were forcibly removed from those centres by the PNG police and the immigration officials. And sadly, their situation hasn't improved since the time that we're on that island. So we do know from updates of refugees and other agencies like UNHCR who remain on the ground that the facilities where refugees are now are simply inadequate and are not providing for refugees' needs. It's not safe, it's not sustainable. They've wound back the healthcare being provided to refugees, and it's just leaving them in an increasingly dangerous situation, especially with the tensions with the local community at some of these new sites.
So what reports of actual violence against detainees by locals have there been?
Well, there's been some individual incidents in the community where people have said they've been attacked or threatened. There's also been a number of roadblocks happen at the entrance to the new centres at Hillside House and West Lorengau. In addition, we've seen protests from the local community, especially relating to sewage runoff from some of these sites. You know, the overriding picture is that these sites are unsafe and unsanitary, and Australia's putting them in a very dangerous situation because these tensions with the local community, nothing has been done to address them. We've also seen in the last few weeks disputes between private contractors and the local landowner happening at those sites, leaving refugees in limbo and caught in the middle of those disputes.
Now, the Australian government had to close the old camp because the PNG Supreme Court found the detention arrangement was unconstitutional. The new centre is newly built. Now that it is up and running, are there any improvements on that old centre?
Well, I mean, I would challenge that the court decision ordered them to close that site. They said the detention and transfer of refugees to PNG in that manner was unlawful and unconstitutional. And the move happened in a deeply humiliating and quite aggressive manner towards those refugees. But they've moved them to new sites which effectively don't address the major problems. I mean, again, you could call these open detention centres. There's severe risk to their safety. There's not secure perimeter fences around them. There's a number of issues with overcrowding and lack of facilities at these new sites which remain unaddressed. So essentially Australia has moved them from, you know, some detention centres to several new ones, not addressing the underlying issues that the court raised around their ongoing uncertainty, the lawfulness of their presence in the country and the lawfulness of their internment on Manus Island.
And in terms, Kate, of moving on from detention, was there any sense that the asylum seeker process was active when you were there and that some men at least were getting to where they wanted to be?
Well, we spoke to a number of people who have supposedly been settled in Port Moresby and what we found from them, and I know that there are others that we weren't able to reach out to whilst we were there, but for the vast majority of these people, settlement hasn't proven successful because PNG doesn't have the economic and social capacity to integrate refugees in a meaningful way and provide for their safety once they're there. So the refugees that we spoke to who are trying to find jobs, they're still struggling with that. They're struggling for survival, essentially, in Port Moresby. They continue to face threats of violence because they're seen as foreigners and outsiders in the country, and they're getting very little support from either the PNG or the Australian authorities.
And have many men gone to the US?
Well, we've seen those numbers increase, obviously, in the last couple of weeks. We know that a few people left, around 80 left just recently. There are large numbers of the refugees and asylum seekers who are not being considered for the refugee arrangement with the US, and that appears to be based on nationality, which raises some real concerns around the transparency and the equality of this arrangement that Australia has made with the the United States.
Kate Schuetze from Amnesty International, thank you.
Thank you.